A few familiar names out there. I'm glad to have you with me this afternoon. And welcome to By the People, for the People, a webinar on how and why to create a community profile. My name is Jessi Barrientos. I am the Technical Services Coordinator, brand new at that job at Westminster Public Library. Previously, I was also the Collection Development Librarian here, and I did quite a few years as an Adult Services Librarian before that, both at High Plains Library District and Jefferson County, all in Colorado. At Westminster, we serve a community of about 113,000 people with 2 branches, one main library and a smaller branch in Southern Westminster. My contact information is listed here. I'm also happy to share it out at the end. If anybody would like to ask me further questions, I will definitely be happy to answer any of those. So what we're going to cover today is what is a community profile, pretty quick and simple, how to create your own, where we'll spend the bulk of our time, and then how to use them to advocate for your library and some of the successes that we've had at Westminster Public Library. So what is a community profile? It's a tool that's been around for actually quite a while. It's often used in the marketing and PR world, but essentially my version of it is to take a lot of data and create a narrative that tells a story to help advocate for services in the library. I start with a broad overview profile of the City of Westminster, and then I've created an individual one for our College Hill Library branch and the 3-mile service area around that library, and then our Irving Street branch as well, so 3 miles around there. So you have a very targeted view of the communities visiting your specific libraries. Each year during our budget rollover process, I will redo our community profile and then divide out our budget based on the information that I'm finding. So I also include that budget breakdown in my profiles. And it's a working document that should be regularly updated and used to drive decisions. So if you're thinking about doing a community profile, you want to start with why. Identify the actual service that you're interested in understanding a little bit better. The work that we do can be very broad, and it can seem really overwhelming, I think, to create a profile for one gigantic every possible reason. So really decide what you're working on it for. Community profiles help bring the needs of specific communities that you're serving into focus. So rather than the big crowd of all the possibilities, you can really see the people you're serving and the needs that they have. I develop community profiles specifically for targeting collection development. So a lot of my examples will be set sort of in that realm, but I do think this is very applicable outside to things like outreach, programming, strategic planning, advocacy, etc. Before starting a community profile, be sure you identify why you need them and how it's going to be used. The next thing you'll really want to give some thought to is the day-to-day experiences with patrons can teach you a lot about the people in your community, and who you're getting is the social people who visit your library regularly, and from those experiences, we develop a lot of assumptions about our community. And those assumptions aren't wrong for the group you're working with, but they are limited. And so all of the information that you're going to be gathering through your community profile process will allow you to assess whether your assumptions apply to a wider part of your community, or whether you need to reassess and change the direction of some of the programs and services that you've been offering. They can also reveal communities who are not utilizing the library and help you to build some bridges and really brainstorm ways to make connections within those communities. And you're going to spend some time identifying your personal assumptions. So really just sit down, take a few minutes, think about who you think uses your library, and write down who those people are. Write down some questions you have about them, and that's a really great place to start your community profile process. And then just a reminder, so we're going to be talking a lot about developing targeted library services based on demographic data. Community profiles can and should be used to to advocate for services for underserved populations in your community, and to expend extra effort building collections. So it's where you can really spend a lot of targeted energy researching small presses, self-published authors, those types of things. but they should not be used to excuse avoiding certain parts or certain populations in representation in your collection or in the way that you're programming. We still need to have a good broad overview of just a well-rounded collection, well-rounded services, and really creating ways for people to be introduced to cultures outside of their own. The image I have here is a really good visual way. I actually have used this several times when trying to talk about diversity and why we put a lot of effort into growing certain parts of the collection. It gives a really good scope for how people can think about that problem. All right, so the initial research and development of community profiles can seem very overwhelming. So I think using some basic project management skills can help you sort of break it down into pieces and tackle them one at a time. Essentially, you're going to create a plan, do some research, create a design, share profiles with other people and specifically stakeholders that you'll have identified, and utilize the final product to support library services. So this part, I think a lot of times we get really gung-ho and just jump right into a project, but I think it's really important, especially with community profiles, to sit down and think through several pieces of the problem and to actually document that process. So I recommend using something called a logic model. It's just a format. You can search logic model on Google and find templates to utilize. There's a whole bunch of different versions. You can choose the one that really makes the most sense to you, and it can be a great tool to convince your supervisors why you should be spending 6 months to a year on this project, and also help you to come back and check in if you get sort of sidetracked in your research. Logic models are one format you can use. You can also just create your own or search for other types of project management templates. And things that you should consider while developing your logic model are specific questions that you have about your community, some of which may result from the assumption assessment that you did earlier. What services should be impacted by the profiles? So mine specifically was collection development, but I did include some pieces that are broad enough to help our programming, outreach, reference, and readers advisory librarians, so that they didn't have to duplicate the effort that I had created, the effort to create what I had created. Who needs to be involved and who to share your profiles with. A single person could develop these. You could also very easily sort of split up the work and come back together at the end to put something together. You also need to make sure that you know who you're going to be sharing this with at the end. And set a timeline for yourself and stick to it. So allow yourself 6 months to a year the first time around. Now is actually the perfect time to get started if you would like to have this document ready to go for January 2021. Annual updates should take a month or less after that. So know that the first round is going to be intense, but after that it's a pretty easy document to maintain. And then be sure you're identifying metrics for success and make sure that your profiles include the date to include data to track those successes. So research is going to take most of your time. Part of your overall plan should actually be to create a research plan. I recommend using the goal for your profiles and the assumptions you identified earlier, as well as a list of questions that you generally have about who your community is, to stay on track while you're doing your research. Brainstorm and create a checklist of resources to utilize. Keep a bibliography with specific reports and links to the places that you found that information. That will come in handy if anybody questions the information in your profile, or if you want to go back the next year and update it. Set a specific time frame for research. Actually block off some time each week or each month to tackle research. And then set a specific time frame for research, So set your time frame and then be sure and stick within that so that you're not overwhelming yourself. Now that you have a research plan, you're going to start with what you already have. So essentially assess the data and resources that are available to your organization. I recommend starting with guiding documents like mission and vision statements, strategic master plans, and library policies. This was pretty instrumental for us when we realized that we're actually part of the Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Department, and our mission includes a commitment to nature, wellness, and literacy. That really actually helped focus a lot of my efforts, especially in nonfiction budgeting, to make sure that we're supporting our 600s and 700s for adults and kids, and that we're creating unique experiences that are related to the programming happening in our Parks and Recreation departments. So then you can take a look at demographic data. This is sometimes easier at some libraries than others. So you can get a lot of free information from American Fact Finder, good broad data about your community. If you do have access to Demographic Now or a similar database, they can get a lot snazzier. So that's the resource that I use to really, I can put in the specific address for our library and then narrow down to a 3-mile radius around that, which we've identified as the range that people are most likely to drive to the library from. So that allows me to get very granular, and I highly recommend that as a resource. And then you're going to start looking into statistics that are tracked by your library. If you're in Colorado, we have the wonderful LRS that you can check years of data. And then hopefully you are able to work with the various departments that have access to collection data, collection usage data, door counts, programming, all of those types of things. And then don't forget to ask your staff. So we're talking sort of numbers data, but I think the anecdotal stuff is important as well. That's where it was interesting to compare. If you look at our collection usage, our larger branch for a long time was where a lot of our collection decisions were made from, and we found continuously that horror didn't circulate well. But then talking to our smaller branch, we found that people asked for it constantly there. And so building a horror collection has been fairly successful, and that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't taken the time to just check around with our librarians and their experiences. All right. So now that you've gathered everything that you already have, you're going to start reaching out to find a broader sense of data. There's a lot of free data online if you're willing to track it down. And it's time to be really creative and think about the questions that you established for yourself at the beginning and what organizations might be able to, might have done some research or have resources that will answer some of those questions. So lean into your curiosity and really get to know your community this way. Some places to start, you can look at city, county, and state government websites, especially tourist bureaus and economic development departments have some really great information. Our economic development actually compiled quite a bit of information about the workforce that has helped me build our professional development section of our collection. Assess school districts in your area. This is a great place to find out about, you know, levels of poverty in your community, the types of, we've found that several schools specialize in unique services to students, so that we have a school that has a program specifically designed for deaf and hard of hearing children, one that focuses on children with autism and various neurological disorders. And so that pieces of information were really useful in thinking about how I was building our juvenile collection. And that was new information to a lot of us. So be sure and search out special interest groups serving specific communities. That's where you might be able to track down, you know, the types, if you have a fairly active LGBT community, or if you have a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, those types of things, they'll have good data. And if they exist at all, will also just tell you about pieces of your community you may not have known about. And then identify other community organizations, businesses, churches, etc., that may have interesting data or make interesting partners. Take time to actually walk or drive around the service area that you're in. You can do that over several weeks. And just take note if you see an interesting organization or something that you're not sure what it is. And you might find some really interesting partners and people who may be interested in using library resources. Right, so the biggest, heaviest lift is over once you've done all that research. Now you've got to take all of it and turn it into some kind of design. So you've reached your stop date and you have to compile a huge mess of data. Now, don't delete anything from your giant research document, but do start a new document that will allow you to narrow down narrow down what your focus is. So you want to decide which parts are the most useful or the most moving pieces of information, and then review that data and craft narratives to address the current and future needs of the community. Consider how you're going to use the community profiles in your daily work, and then choose a format that will be most useful to you and your immediate stakeholders. So Westminster loves a spreadsheet. So mine is actually designed as a giant Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, and it's been pretty useful and easy to access for people. If you want to make a beautiful infographic, use a Microsoft Word document, put together some kind of fancy poster, whatever you think will have the biggest impact for your culture and organization, I think will work just fine. Then you're going to draft and edit profiles. Make sure to ask coworkers and your supervisor to proof and provide feedback. And then finalize your profiles. Be sure to take your original document and save it away in a safe place, and then put copies that are available where other staff members can access them. So sharing, I think, is the most vital part of this. It would be very easy to do all of this work and then to tuck the document away and not look at it again. But you need to immediately share the final document with your administrators. Reference the document anytime that you're helping to make library decisions or thinking about new services, and share it with the community when you're approached by organizations for partnership opportunities, for questions about services related to the profile, or if you have a challenge to materials or programs created based on the profiles. And now it's time to get to work. So allow it to be a living document. Review and update your profile at least annually or every other year if you can, and then keep all of your past profiles and track the changes over time. Open and review your profiles regularly. I actually open mine just about every day, and I know a lot of it by heart now, but I still will refer to it if I have any questions, especially the budgeting section. And then most importantly, modify your plans and behaviors based on the information you find and changes that are occurring. Even when they challenge your long-held assumptions, you still need to spend the time to try to change your trajectory based on the information you're finding. So what's next for Westminster? We have our profiles. I actually have just created the third year, and I'm beginning to see some interesting trends that verify gentrification that we suspected would be happening in historic Westminster. And so we're ready to do a few more new things with it. One part is that we're working on creating a profile specifically for our online users. It's harder to get access to that data, but it would be very interesting to see the types of people who are specifically using digital, our ebooks and our databases. To make sure the efforts are made. So we also have addressed some collection onboarding, and that came through the discussions of creating the community profile, that there's a lot of confusion since we had made a lot of changes in technical services. So we ended up creating actually an onboarding process about technical services in the collection and how we do purchasing. All staff have seen that, and then all new staff will be onboarded using it. And in addition to that, we have twice a year of what I call weeding parties, where essentially I run through at the branch that I'm at the type of information that I found in our community profiles, my goal for that collection, and then we talk about basic weeding procedures. And that's in hopes that all of the work that I'm doing around the community data that I've identified is not being sort of undone, or different directions taken with the collection at the branches. And then we'll be updating our collection policies soon to be more in line with community needs. And my last big goal is actually to develop a core collection. Now that we know so much about the community and about the collection usage, we can actually start to identify parts of the collection that we want to protect the integrity of the most. And just a few successes to give you an idea. So we actually haven't seen an increase in circulation, although the new parts of the collection that I've been developing based on the community profiles have done very well. But some other types of successes we've had is gaining some trust from our administrators. I think it really helped for them to see that the decisions I was making day to day were based in data and information about our specific community. And that's resulted in an increase in our budget, which was the first time that's happened in quite a while. I also was able to really advocate for a stronger Spanish language collection. Ours was pretty dusty and outdated and largely translations. So it was interesting because we found Westminster as a whole has about a 20% Hispanic population, which is significant. But around our Irving Street Library, we actually have 44% Hispanic population. And that number was just large enough to really sort of shift the perception about the value of that collection. And so I used some of the additional funds that we received and was able to attend Phil in Guadalajara for the first time. And we have a shiny new collection that's looking really great and has in place as we start to do some outreach with those communities. And finally, I think we've seen quite a bit of engagement from staff and patrons. I've received lots of comments from both of those groups, as well as some formal comment cards, like this one that says, whomever is choosing new books in the children's library is doing an amazing job. The books are progressive, relevant, timely, and incredible. My almost 4-year-old and I love the introduction of new cultures, the representation of immigrants, people of color, feminism, and so much more. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is just one example of many that we've had. So people are certainly noticing the shift in the collection based on those decisions. Thank you all for listening to what I had to say today. And now I'd like to take some questions. So if you would like to unmute yourself and ask, or ask through the chat, and I'm happy to answer them for you.
Leanne Flander has a question. How did you decide which pieces of information from your research to include in the profile?
So some of that was tied into the priorities that are set forward through the city's strategic plan. So I aligned a lot of what I was searching for around the larger goals of the city. I also did choose things to include that I thought might be parts of the collection that were more prone to be challenged. So I made sure I had some good, strong data if I could find it for some pieces of those collections. All right, and then I see, okay, same question. Anything else I can answer for you today? Have we done focus groups or interviews was another question. We have not. That's actually on my to-do list. So I went to a great session at, I believe it was our Click Library Consortium, about how to do sort of quick informal polls. So that's one thing I would like to start, is how to place some polls around the library and get feedback really quickly on some further questions that I have. And we are looking at developing new policy. We'll definitely be doing some focus groups with some of our administrators, some staff, and hopefully patrons during that process that will be incorporated in the future. And then, can we see the profile? I would be happy to send it out. So I'll work with David to share that document. I don't have it because I'm not connected to my network drive today. I apologize for that. All right, question. Are there any good tools or resources you use to make collection development decisions about what kind of Spanish language materials to add? Will be relevant, etc. So there are some. I would do check sort of the Amazon, and there's a few US like bestseller in Spanish type lists, so I utilize those. But I do depend quite a bit on two vendors. So we actually use Larito and Tulane, who are both based in Colorado, but I believe work outside of the state. And they both actually attend Phil in Guadalajara, as well as a book fair in Barcelona and several others around Latin America. And they always come back with a lot of really relevant information for us. I do also try to attend Reforma I think they do a full day workshop once a year here in Colorado, and I am always looking for resources there as well. Other questions? Am I open to consulting with other library systems who are just starting this work? Elena, email me. You can contact David or Slim and get my information, and I'll back up here in just a minute so you can see it again. And I'd talk more to you about that later. That would be the first time I'd done such a thing. What else? I do it myself, so I'm actually in a little bit of an odd position where we have a single collection development person, and that's me. So I do all ages and all formats in our physical collection. We do have a digital librarian who will be taking on the online profile soon, so that'll be nice to have her input as well. And with oversight of my supervisor, so she approved all of the work I was doing. All right, I'll give one more minute in case anybody wants to pop a last question in. Yes, I'd be happy to make my session and slides available as well to answer the last question. What surprises have your research uncovered? So actually quite a few things. I think we had a view of our community as fairly conservative, very a higher percentage of practicing religion, people practicing various religions, but especially evangelical Christian, LDS and those types of things. So all of that we knew from working with people in our community. But I was really actually pretty surprised to show that our voter registration is pretty evenly split between Democratic and Republican, and that there's actually a larger group of independent voters. And so I did start to do some work to sort of realign, especially our 300s and political materials, to make sure we had a pretty well-rounded viewpoints on both sides, and that's been a success. Like I said, I was pleasantly surprised to find that genre fiction does a lot better at our Irving Street Library. And so I've fleshed out a lot of our romance and horror. I think those were the two biggest ones that just sort of overturned what I would have thought was true about our community. But there's been other little things too. All right, anything else? All right, well, thank you so much. I will, hold on just a sec. There you go. There's my contact information one more time. And I would be happy to answer any other questions that occur to you later on. Thank you all for joining me this afternoon.